My name is Augusta Williams, and at 67 years old, I thought I had seen it all until my son Thomas brought home his new fiancée, Camille. I was genuinely excited to meet the woman who had captured my only child's heart, especially since she came from France, a country where I had spent 8 wonderful years teaching English. What Thomas never mentioned to Camille was my fluency in French, something I kept to myself that evening. The perfect dinner I had planned quickly turned into a nightmare when I overheard what she really thought of me. Let me know where you are watching from, and if you enjoy stories about family betrayals and sweet justice, hit that subscribe button while I tell you what happened next. Life changes in ways you never expect. 12 years ago, I lost my husband Robert to a sudden heart attack. One moment we were planning our retirement travels, and the next I was planning his funeral. The grief nearly broke me, but I had our son Thomas to consider. Even though he was an adult with his own life by then, the bond between us had always been special. Robert had left us both well provided for, with Thomas set to receive a substantial inheritance on his 35th birthday, which was now just 6 months away. Before I met Robert, I had built a career as an international educator. I taught English and literature at American schools abroad, spending 8 years in Paris, 3 in Madrid, and brief stints in several other European cities. Those years gave me not just fluency in French and Spanish, but a deep appreciation for different cultures. When I returned to the States and met Robert at a faculty mixer, I was 33 and ready to put down roots. Thomas came along a year after our wedding, and from the moment he was born, he had his father wrapped around his tiny finger. Robert was the most devoted father I had ever seen, and I fell even more deeply in love watching them together. Thomas inherited his father's analytical mind and kind heart, along with my love for languages and stories. As a child, Thomas was thoughtful and sensitive. While other boys were roughhousing, he would be building elaborate structures with his blocks or reading far above his grade level. In high school, he discovered computer programming and found his calling. He graduated at the top of his class and received a full scholarship to Stanford, where he studied computer science. After college, Thomas landed a job at a promising tech startup in Silicon Valley. Within 5 years, the company went public, and his stock options provided him with financial security most young people could only dream of. But despite his professional success, Thomas struggled with relationships. His trusting nature was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. He always saw the best in people, sometimes overlooking red flags that would send others running. His first serious girlfriend in college cheated on him with his roommate. Another woman he dated for 2 years suddenly announced she was moving to Australia with no discussion about their future. Then there was Stephanie, who seemed perfect until Thomas discovered she had massive gambling debts she had been hiding. Each heartbreak left him a little more cautious, but never cynical. That was what worried me most as his mother. I wanted him to find love, but I also wanted him to protect himself from those who might see his generous spirit and financial security as targets. When Thomas called me 6 months ago, bubbling with excitement about a woman named Camille whom he had met at a tech conference in San Francisco, I was hopeful, but guarded. He told me she was French, working in the States on a temporary visa as a marketing consultant. Their connection had been instant, he said, like nothing he had ever experienced. As the weeks passed, Thomas called less frequently, and when he did, he shared fewer details about Camille. This was unusual for him, as he had always been open with me about his life. When I gently asked questions about her background or their plans, his answers became vague or defensive. He mentioned that her visa situation was becoming urgent, and they were exploring options. My maternal instinct began sending warning signals. Then came the call that left me stunned. After dating for only 4 months, Thomas announced they were engaged. When I expressed surprise at the speed of their relationship, he brushed it off, saying, "When you know, Mom. We need to get married quickly because of her visa situation, but I would have asked her anyway." I tried to sound supportive, while my mind raced with concerns. The timing seemed suspicious, especially with his 35th birthday and inheritance approaching. But I reminded myself that I had not even met Camille yet. Perhaps she truly loved my son, and the visa issues were just an unfortunate complication. The opportunity to meet finally came when Thomas called to say Camille's parents were visiting from France for 2 weeks. They wanted to have dinner together, and Thomas suggested my home as the meeting place. I agreed immediately, eager to finally meet the woman who had swept my son off his feet and the family I might soon be connected to through marriage. As I hung up the phone, I looked at Robert's photograph on my bedside table. "I wish you were here to help me with this," I whispered. "Something doesn't feel right, but I don't want to ruin Thomas' happiness if I'm wrong." All I could do was prepare for the dinner and hope that meeting Camille would ease my worries rather than confirm them. The week before the dinner, I threw myself into preparations. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just to impress Camille's family, but also to show Thomas that I was making a genuine effort. I deep-cleaned my modest but comfortable suburban home, polished the silver that had been a wedding gift from Robert's parents, and planned a menu that would showcase traditional American cooking while being sophisticated enough for French guests. I decided on a starter of New England clam chowder, followed by roast beef with all the trimmings, and a classic apple pie for dessert. I also selected wines that I thought would pair well, though I worried my choices might seem unsophisticated to French palates. The night before, I baked the pie and chopped all the vegetables, wanting to minimize my time in the kitchen during the actual visit. As I prepared, I contemplated whether I should mention my ability to speak French. Ultimately, I decided against it, at least initially. I wanted to observe the family dynamics naturally, without them feeling the need to censor themselves around me. I would reveal my language skills at an appropriate moment, perhaps over dessert, as a pleasant surprise. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock on Saturday evening. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my navy blue dress, and opened the door with my warmest smile. Thomas stood there beaming, his arm around a stunningly beautiful young woman. Behind them stood an elegant couple who could only be her parents. Camille was even more gorgeous than the few photos Thomas had shown me. Tall and slender with lustrous dark hair and striking green eyes, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. She wore a simple but obviously expensive black dress with a single strand of pearls. When she smiled and extended her hand, I noticed a massive diamond engagement ring that must have cost Thomas a small fortune. "Hello, Mrs. Williams," she said in lightly accented English. "It is such a pleasure to finally meet you. Thomas has told me so many wonderful things about you." She leaned in and kissed both my cheeks in the European fashion. I felt myself warming to her immediately, despite my reservations. Thomas introduced her parents, Monsieur and Madame Dubois. They were both tall and distinguished-looking, with the kind of effortless elegance that seemed stereotypically French. Monsieur Dubois had silver temples and carried himself with authority, while Madame Dubois was slim and poised, her makeup subtle but perfect. "Please, call me Augusta," I said as I welcomed them into my home. "I am so happy to meet you all. Come in, dinner is almost ready." As we moved to the living room for pre-dinner drinks, I noticed how Camille kept her hand possessively on Thomas' arm, occasionally giving him adoring glances that he returned with equal intensity. They certainly looked like a couple in love, which eased some of my concerns. The initial conversation flowed surprisingly well. The Dubois spoke excellent English, and we discussed safe topics like their flight, their impressions of America, and the sightseeing they had done in San Francisco. Camille was charming and attentive, asking me questions about my teaching career and showing appropriate interest in my answers. She complimented my home sincerely, noting specific details that indicated she was actually paying attention. Yet there were moments that gave me pause. Occasionally, when Thomas was speaking and looking at me, I caught Camille giving me a quick once-over with slightly narrowed eyes. Once, when I mentioned Robert's inheritance provisions for Thomas, I saw her exchange a meaningful glance with her father. And when Thomas excused himself to use the restroom, her animated demeanor dimmed noticeably. Still, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. First meetings can be awkward, and she was probably nervous. When I announced that dinner was ready, Camille immediately offered to help me bring dishes to the table. I accepted gratefully, hoping for a moment to connect with her one-on-one. In the kitchen, she was polite but slightly distant. She asked superficial questions about how long I had lived in the house and whether I enjoyed cooking. When I tried to engage her more personally, asking about her family and background in France, her answers became vague. She seemed relieved when we finished arranging the food and returned to the dining room. I had seated Thomas and Camille on one side of the table, with her parents across from them and myself at the head. As we began our meal, I noticed Monsieur Dubois appreciatively tasting the wine I had selected, nodding with what appeared to be genuine approval. Madame Dubois complimented the chowder, noting that she had never tried it before but found it delicious. As the main course was served, the conversation continued pleasantly enough in English. Thomas talked about his work, carefully explaining technical concepts so everyone could follow. Camille spoke about her marketing projects, though I noticed she never mentioned specific clients or gave many details about her role. Then came a moment that would change everything. Camille excused herself to use the restroom, leaving her parents, Thomas, and me at the table. Thomas began telling a story about a misunderstanding at work, and the Dubois were listening politely. As Thomas reached the punchline of his story, making Monsieur Dubois chuckle appreciatively, I saw Madame Dubois glance toward the hallway to make sure Camille wasn't returning yet. Est-ce qu'elle est vraiment sérieuse à propos de ce mariage? Monsieur Dubois asked his wife quietly in French. Is she really serious about this marriage? I kept my expression neutral, continuing to eat as if I hadn't understood. My heart began to beat faster as I realized I might be about to hear something revealing. Madame Dubois shrugged delicately. Elle semble déterminée. La situation de visa est urgente. She seems determined. The visa situation is urgent. Before they could continue, Camille returned to the table, and they smoothly switched back to English. But my antenna was now fully raised. I served the remainder of the meal with a smile fixed on my face, waiting and watching for any further clues about what was really happening. I didn't have to wait long. Midway through the main course, I excused myself to get more gravy from the kitchen. As I was about to return, I heard Camille speaking rapidly in French to her parents. I paused in the hallway, out of sight but able to hear clearly. Ne vous inquiétez pas, Camille was saying, her voice low but intense. Son fils est parfait pour mon plan. Il est tellement naïf, tellement amoureux. Don't worry. Her son is perfect for my plan. He is so naive, so in love. Her father responded with concern. Mais ce n'est pas juste pour lui, ou pour cette femme. But it's not fair to him. Or to this woman. Camille laughed softly, a sound completely different from the warm laugh she had been sharing with us at dinner. Cette vieille vache laide? Qui s'est soucié d'elle? Je vais épouser son fils, obtenir ma carte verte, puis attendre qu'il reçoive son héritage. Après ça, le divorce sera facile. That ugly old cow? Who cares about her? I will marry her son, get my green card, then wait until he receives his inheritance. After that, divorce will be easy. I felt as though someone had punched me in the stomach. My hands shook as I gripped the gravy boat, nearly spilling its contents. I had suspected something wasn't right, but the cruelty and calculation in Camille's voice was beyond anything I had imagined. Her mother spoke next, sounding uncomfortable. Camille, je ne suis pas sûre que ce soit la bonne approche. Et s'il découvrait ton plan? Camille, I'm not sure this is the right approach. What if he discovers your plan? Il ne le fera pas, Camille said confidently. Il est aveuglé par l'amour. Et de toute façon, une fois que nous serons mariés et que j'aurai ma résidence permanente, il n'aura rien à dire. Quelques mois après l'héritage, je trouverai une raison de partir. Peut-être même le faire passer pour un abus, pour obtenir plus d'argent. He won't. He's blinded by love. And anyway, once we are married and I have my permanent residency, he'll have nothing to say about it. A few months after the inheritance, he'll find a reason to leave. Maybe even make it look like abuse to get more money. Her father sighed. Tu as toujours été déterminé, juste. Essaie de ne pas trop le blesser. C'est un jeune homme bien, You have always been determined. Just try not to hurt him too much. He seems like a good young man. Cold fury replaced my initial shock. This woman was planning to destroy my son's life, use him for immigration status and money, and had the audacity to call me an ugly cow in my own home. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed to compose myself before returning to the dining room. I took several deep breaths, set my face in a pleasant expression, and walked back to the table. "Harry's the gravy," I said cheerfully, placing it between Thomas and Camille. "I hope everyone is enjoying the roast." Looking at Thomas smiling adoringly at Camille, I felt physically ill. My sweet, trusting son had no idea about the viper he had invited into our lives. I watched as Camille seamlessly returned to her charming English-speaking persona, touching Thomas' arm affectionately and complimenting my cooking to my face. For the remainder of the main course, I observed her with new eyes, noting the calculated nature of her every gesture and comment. When she spoke to Thomas, she would touch him constantly, but her eyes often drifted to his watch or the decor of my home, as if assessing its value. When Thomas wasn't looking, the warmth in her expression would switch off like a light. I needed to confirm my suspicions beyond the damning conversation I'd overheard. So when Thomas mentioned their quick wedding timeline, I asked innocently, "Have you two thought about where you'll live after the wedding?" "Oh, we will find somewhere nice, I think," Camille replied vaguely. Thomas jumped in eagerly. "Actually, I thought we might look at houses in your neighborhood, Mom. Camille loves the area, and it would be great to be close to you." I watched as Camille's smile faltered almost imperceptibly before she recovered. "That would be lovely," she said, though I could see the idea did not appeal to her at all. "And what are your career plans, Camille?" I asked. "Will you continue your marketing work after you've secured permanent residency?" Her eyes flashed briefly at my specific mention of immigration status. "I will see what opportunities arise," she said smoothly. "Perhaps I will take some time to settle into American life properly first." Throughout the rest of the meal, I asked seemingly innocent questions that were actually designed to reveal more of Camille's true intentions. I mentioned a friend whose daughter-in-law had difficulties with the immigration process, noting how expensive and stressful it had been. I brought up Thomas' inheritance casually, commenting that it would be such a relief when the trust was finally dispersed and the legal obligations fulfilled. With each question, I observed Camille's reactions carefully, and each time, my worst suspicions were confirmed. She was highly interested in the inheritance details, pressing for specific amounts while pretending to be merely curious. She asked pointed questions about immigration attorneys and the green card process, barely concealing her urgency. Meanwhile, her parents watched with mixed expressions. Madame Dubois seemed increasingly uncomfortable, while Monsieur Dubois remained impassive, occasionally giving his daughter warning glances when her questions became too transparent. Throughout it all, Thomas remained completely oblivious, interpreting Camille's interest as excitement about their future together. Every time he looked at her with those loving, trusting eyes, my heart broke a little more. By the time I served apple pie for dessert, I had heard enough in both languages to be absolutely certain of Camille's intentions. The only question remaining was how to protect my son without humiliating him in front of everyone. I needed time to think, to plan my approach carefully, so I continued the charade, pouring coffee and serving pie, while making pleasant conversation, all while the knowledge of betrayal burned inside me like acid. As we enjoyed dessert, the conversation turned to wedding plans, and my suspicions found even more confirmation. Camille spoke with unexpected authority about arrangements that were apparently already in motion. "We have reserved a small venue for 3 weeks from now," she announced, not meeting my eyes. "Just a simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." 3 weeks? I echoed, unable to hide my surprise. "My goodness, that's very soon. I had no idea you were planning such a quick wedding." Thomas looked sheepish. "I know it's fast, Mom. We wanted to tell you earlier, but with Camille's parents visiting and the visa timing, everything happened quickly." Camille nodded emphatically. "Yes, unfortunately my work visa expires soon, and we don't want to risk any complications." Her eyes darted to her father, who gave a slight nod. I took a slow sip of my coffee, processing this information. The timeline was even more rushed than I had feared. 3 weeks hardly gave me any time to intervene, to help Thomas see the truth before he made a terrible mistake. "You must let me help with the preparations," I said, watching Camille's reaction carefully. "I would love to be involved." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is kind, but we have most things arranged already. Perhaps you could help with the flowers?" I nodded, noting how she had effectively sidelined me to a minor role. It was clever of her, maintaining the appearance of including me while ensuring I had no meaningful input or opportunity to slow things down. As the conversation continued, Camille's parents presented Thomas with an engagement gift, a sleek, expensive watch that he admired with genuine appreciation. I watched as Camille explained in English that it was a family tradition, while shooting a triumphant look at her parents. The message was clear: this expensive gift was part of securing their mark. The exchange reminded me painfully of my own first marriage before Robert. A brief and disastrous union to a charming man who had been interested only in my family's connections. I had been young and naive then, blind to the warning signs that seemed so obvious in retrospect. The marriage had ended within a year, leaving me wiser but heartbroken. I had hoped Thomas would never experience such betrayal. And now here I was, watching history repeat itself in my own dining room. The tension inside me continued to build. Several times I caught Camille and her parents speaking rapid French to each other during momentary lulls. Each time, I pretended to be busy with serving or clearing plates, all while understanding every cutting word. Sera-t-il facile d'obtenir l'argent une fois que vous serez marié? Monsieur Dubois asked discreetly as Thomas helped me clear the main course dishes. Will it be easy to get the money once you're married? Camille nodded slightly. Le trust est configuré pour payer automatiquement. Je dois juste rester mariée assez longtemps pour établir des droits conjugaux. 6 mois après l'héritage devrait suffire. The trust is set up to pay out automatically. I just need to stay married long enough to establish spousal rights. 6 months after the inheritance should be sufficient. The casual way she discussed defrauding my son made my hands shake with anger. I accidentally dropped a dessert spoon, the clatter momentarily halting conversation. "I'm so sorry," I said, bending to retrieve it. "Clumsy me." "Let me help you, Augusta," Thomas said, always thoughtful. As he helped me in the kitchen, he whispered, "Everyone seems to be getting along great, don't you think?" "I'm so glad you like Camille." I forced a smile, unable to shatter his happiness in that moment. "She certainly is. Memorable," I managed. When we returned to the dining room, Camille was showing her mother something on her phone, speaking quietly in French. "J'ai déjà contacté un avocat spécialisé en divorce qui connaît bien les mariages impliquant des questions d'immigration. I've already contacted a divorce lawyer who specializes in marriage involving immigration issues." Her mother looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Et Thomas n'a aucun soupçon? And Thomas has no suspicions?" Camille laughed softly. "Absolument aucun. Il est tellement amoureux qu'il ne voit rien d'autre." "Absolutely none. He is so in love he sees nothing else." I nearly dropped the coffee pot I was carrying. The depth of her deception was staggering. Not only was she planning to use Thomas for a green card and his inheritance, but she had already consulted with a divorce attorney specializing in immigration cases. This was no impulsive scheme, but a carefully orchestrated fraud. As I poured coffee with a hand I fought to keep steady, Camille turned the conversation to their honeymoon plans. She described an extravagant 2-week stay at a luxury resort in Bali, speaking enthusiastically about the private villa with its own pool that Thomas had apparently already paid for in full. The cost of such a honeymoon must have been enormous, and I knew it would be charged to Thomas' credit cards. She was already spending his money freely, establishing a pattern of luxury at his expense that would likely accelerate once they were married. When Thomas excused himself to use the restroom again, Camille turned to me with a calculating look. "Your son is so generous," she said, her English suddenly more accented than before. "He insists on giving me everything I want. It is quite How do you say charming? Yes. Thomas has always been generous to a fault, I replied evenly. Sometimes too generous with people who might not have his best interests at heart. Her eyes flashed with momentary alarm before her practiced smile returned. Well, he has nothing to worry about with me. I love him very much. I'm sure you do, I said, holding her gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. For an instant, I thought I saw uncertainty in her expression. Had she detected something in my tone? Did she suspect I understood more than I was letting on? The moment was broken when Thomas returned, beaming as he retook his seat beside Camille. Looking at his happy face, I felt a wave of protective fury. My son deserved someone who loved him for himself, not a calculated predator who saw him only as a path to citizenship and wealth. As the evening progressed, I began deliberately dropping hints that I was more knowledgeable about immigration and legal matters than they might have assumed. I mentioned a colleague from my teaching days who had worked for the Immigration Service, noting how thorough their fraud investigations could be. I brought up a news story about marriage fraud prosecutions, remarking on the serious penalties involved. Each time, I observed the subtle reactions from Camille and her parents, the slight stiffening of shoulders, the quick glances exchanged, the abrupt changes of subject. By the time we finished dessert, the atmosphere had grown noticeably strained. Camille checked her watch repeatedly, and Madame Dubois looked increasingly uncomfortable. Only Thomas seemed oblivious to the tension, happily refilling wine glasses and suggesting we move to the living room for after-dinner drinks. I knew the evening was approaching its climax. Soon the Dubois family would make their excuses and leave, potentially taking with them my only opportunity to protect my son. I needed to act, but I had to be strategic. A direct confrontation might only drive Thomas further into Camille's arms, making him defensive and less likely to see reason. As we prepared to move to the living room, I accidentally on purpose knocked over a water glass, creating a minor commotion and a needed moment of disruption. Oh dear. I'm so sorry, I exclaimed, grabbing napkins to mop up the spill. In the confusion, I saw Camille roll her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Her mask of politeness was slipping as the evening wore on, revealing glimpses of her true character. I needed to push things further, to create the perfect moment for my revelation. But first, I needed a few minutes alone to collect my thoughts and plan my exact words. As we moved to the living room for coffee, I excused myself. I need just a moment to freshen up, I said with a smile. Please make yourselves comfortable. In the privacy of my bathroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked composed, but my eyes revealed the turmoil within. I had to make a critical decision, and I had to make it now. I thought of my friend Eleanor, whose son had been in a similar situation 5 years earlier. He had married a woman who, it turned out, was only interested in his family business. By the time the truth came to light, she had already done considerable damage, both financially and emotionally. Eleanor had confronted the woman directly, causing a scene that ultimately pushed her son away for nearly 2 years. By the time he reconnected with his mother, his marriage had ended disastrously, but the relationship with Eleanor had been needlessly damaged as well. I didn't want to repeat that mistake. I needed to expose Camille without humiliating Thomas or pushing him away. If I created a scene now, he might leave with Camille and accelerate their wedding plans, cutting me out entirely. No, I needed a more subtle approach. Something that would plant a seed of doubt in Thomas' mind, while clearly showing Camille that I knew exactly what she was doing. It needed to be devastating to her plan, but not to my relationship with my son. I remembered something my late husband used to say: the most powerful move is often the one your opponent never sees coming. Robert had been a chess enthusiast, always thinking several moves ahead. I needed to channel that strategic thinking now. I considered my options carefully. I could reveal my understanding of French immediately, confronting Camille with her own words. That would certainly create a dramatic moment, but it might also backfire, allowing her to paint me as the villain who had been deceptively eavesdropping. I could take Thomas aside privately, But that would give Camille time to create a counter-narrative, perhaps even convincing him to leave with her immediately. I could contact immigration authorities with my suspicions, but without hard evidence, that might accomplish nothing while potentially alienating Thomas. Then it came to me. The perfect approach would be to reveal my knowledge in a way that Camille and her parents couldn't deny, but without creating an ugly scene that would embarrass Thomas. I would speak to them in French as they were leaving, making it clear that I had understood everything while giving Camille an opportunity to come clean on her own terms. It was a risk, but it felt right. It would put the ball in Camille's court while making it clear that I held all the cards. As I made this decision, I felt a momentary doubt. What if I was wrong? What if, despite all the evidence, Camille genuinely loved Thomas, and I was about to damage their relationship unnecessarily? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. No, I couldn't ignore what I had heard with my own ears. Camille's plan had been stated explicitly, cruelly, and with premeditation. She had called me an ugly cow and planned to falsely accuse my son of abuse to extract more money from him. There was no misinterpreting those intentions. I whispered a brief prayer for strength and wisdom. Thomas was my only child, and I had promised Robert on his deathbed that I would always look out for him. I couldn't stand by and watch him be used and discarded by someone who saw him only as a meal ticket and a path to citizenship. With my resolve strengthened, I splashed cool water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and returned to the living room with a serene smile. The end game was approaching, and I was ready. When I returned, I found Thomas enthusiastically showing Monsieur Dubois his collection of vintage jazz records, while Camille and her mother spoke quietly in French in the corner. I caught a fragment of their conversation as I entered. Plus que quelques heures à supporter cette soirée, et ensuite nous n'aurons plus à la voir très souvent. Just a few more hours to endure this evening, and then we won't have to see her very often. Her mother nodded, but looked uncomfortable. This confirmed what I had suspected all along. Madame Dubois had reservations about her daughter's scheme, but wasn't willing to stop it. I filed this information away, thinking it might be useful. I served coffee and brandy with the poise of a gracious hostess, all while observing every interaction with new clarity. Thomas remained blissfully unaware of the currents swirling around him, eagerly discussing wedding details and their future together. Camille performed her role flawlessly in English, though I noticed she grew increasingly eager to leave as the evening progressed. The weather tomorrow is supposed to be quite bad, Monsieur Dubois commented, looking meaningfully at his wife and daughter. Perhaps we should think about heading back to the hotel soon. Camille immediately picked up the cue. Yes, it is getting late, and we have that tour scheduled for tomorrow morning. She turned to me with a practiced smile. Thank you so much for this lovely dinner, Augusta. Everything was charming. I noted her careful choice of words. Not delicious, not wonderful, just charming. A polite dismissal of my efforts that no one else would recognize as subtle criticism. Thomas looked disappointed. Do you really have to leave so soon? I was hoping we'd all have more time to get to know each other. Camille placed a possessive hand on his arm. We have plenty of time for that, mon chéri. But Papa and Maman need their rest after all the sightseeing today. I saw my moment approaching and prepared myself mentally. The next few minutes would be crucial. As everyone began gathering coats and making farewell noises, I observed Camille visibly relaxing, clearly believing she'd successfully navigated the evening without raising any suspicions. Little did she know, the most important moment of the dinner was yet to come. The moment had arrived. Thomas helped Madame Dubois with her coat, while Monsieur Dubois checked his phone for their car service. Camille stood slightly apart, texting someone with a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. I approached her parents first, extending my hand warmly to Madame Dubois. Ce fut un plaisir de vous rencontrer. J'espère que le reste de votre séjour à San Francisco sera agréable. It was a pleasure to meet you. I hope the rest of your stay in San Francisco will be pleasant. The effect was immediate and electrifying. Madame Dubois' hand froze in midair, her eyes widening in shock. Monsieur Dubois looked up from his phone, his face draining of color. Across the room, Camille whipped around so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Vous parlez français? Madame Dubois stammered. You speak French? I smiled serenely. Oui, couramment. J'ai enseigné l'anglais à Paris pendant 8 ans. Yes, fluently. I taught English in Paris for 8 years. The 3 French visitors exchanged panicked glances, clearly calculating exactly how much I might have overheard. Thomas looked between us in confusion. Mom, you never told me you speak French, he said, sounding impressed rather than suspicious. That's amazing. I kept my eyes on Camille as I responded to him. There are many things we haven't had a chance to discuss recently, sweetheart. Then I switched back to French, addressing Camille directly. J'ai trouvé particulièrement intéressante votre conversation sur la façon dont vous prévoyez d'obtenir votre carte verte, de divorcer de mon fils et de prendre une partie de son héritage. I found your conversation about how you plan to get your green card, divorce my son, and take part of his inheritance particularly interesting. Camille's face contorted with shock and fear before she quickly composed herself. Je ne sais pas de quoi vous parlez. I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas looked between us, his expression growing concerned. What's going on? What are you saying to each other? I held up a hand gently. Just a moment, Thomas. I need to finish this conversation with your fiancé. Then I continued in French, my voice soft but firm. Nous savons toutes les deux que c'est exactement ce que vous avez dit. Vous m'avez appelé une vieille vache laide, ce qui est votre droit bien sûr. Mais planifier une fraude au mariage et à l'immigration, c'est beaucoup plus sérieux. We both know that's exactly what you said. You called me an ugly old cow, which is your right, of course. But planning marriage and immigration fraud? That's much more serious. Monsieur Dubois stepped forward, his expression grave but controlled. Madame Williams, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. My daughter can be impulsive with her words. I shifted my gaze to him, keeping my demeanor calm and dignified. Ce n'est pas une impulsion quand elle a déjà consulté un avocat spécialisé en divorce pour les cas d'immigration. It's not impulsive when she's already consulted a divorce lawyer specializing in immigration cases. Madame Dubois gasped audibly, apparently unaware of this detail herself. Camille, est-ce vrai? Camille, is this true? Camille was now visibly panicking, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Mom, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she said to Thomas in English, her voice high and desperate. She's twisting things, misunderstanding. My French must be too fast for her. I smiled, sadly. Si vous souhaitez tester ma compréhension du français, nous pouvons certainement le faire. Peut-être aimeriez-vous que je répète mot pour mot ce que vous avez dit au sujet de falsifier des allégations d'abus pour obtenir plus d'argent lors du divorce? If you want to test my understanding of French, we can certainly do that. Perhaps you'd like me to repeat word for word what you said about falsifying abuse allegations to get more money in the divorce? The color drained completely from Camille's face. Thomas was looking increasingly alarmed, his eyes darting between us. What is she saying, Camille? Thomas asked, his voice tight with growing concern. What is my mother talking about? Camille grabbed his arm, her expression suddenly tearful and vulnerable, a transformation so rapid it could only be calculated. She is trying to come between us. She hates me because I'm taking her precious son away. I remained calm, refusing to be baited into an emotional outburst. Je vous donne 24 heures pour dire la vérité à mon fils, ou je le ferai moi-même. Je vous suggère également de reconsidérer vos plans concernant l'immigration. La fraude au mariage est un crime fédéral aux États-Unis. I'm giving you 24 hours to tell my son the truth, or I'll do it myself. I also suggest you reconsider your immigration plans. Marriage fraud is a federal crime in the United States. She has threatened me, Camille cried to Thomas, clutching his arm tighter. She said she will call immigration on me. Thomas looked stricken. Mom, what is going on? Please, speak English. I don't understand what you're saying to each other. I switched to English for my son's benefit. Thomas, I overheard some concerning conversations tonight. I believe Camille needs to be honest with you about her intentions for your relationship. giving her the opportunity to do that herself. Augusta, this is not appropriate, Monsieur Dubois interjected, his authoritative manner returning. You are making wild accusations based on fragments of conversation you may have misunderstood. I met his gaze steadily. I'm quite certain I understood perfectly when your daughter explained her plan to marry my son for a green card, wait for his inheritance, and then divorce him possibly after making false abuse claims to maximize her financial gain. There was really very little room for misinterpretation. Thomas' face had gone pale. He looked at Camille, who was now crying dramatically. Camille, is this true? Tell me my mother misunderstood. For a moment, I saw calculation in Camille's eyes through the tears, weighing her options, deciding which lie would be most effective. But before she could speak, her mother surprisingly stepped forward. Camille, ça suffit. Dis-lui la vérité. Camille, enough. Tell him the truth. Maman, Camille hissed. Madame Dubois looked at her daughter with disappointment. This has gone too far. I said nothing when you talked about the green card, because I understood your visa situation is difficult. But planning divorce before you're even married? Consulting lawyers already? This is not how we raised you. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. Camille's performance faltered as she realized she was losing control of the situation. Thomas took a step back from her, physically creating distance as the emotional distance grew. Camille, I need you to be honest with me right now, he said, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. Did you say these things my mother is claiming? Camille tried one last desperate tactic. Of course not. Not like that anyway. She is taking things out of context. I made a joke about green cards because of the stress of my visa situation, that's all. She watched your face, calculating his response. But Thomas wasn't buying it anymore. And the part about divorce lawyers? And waiting for my inheritance? Were those jokes too? She had no answer for that. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Monsieur Dubois finally broke it. I think it would be best if we left now, he said stiffly. This evening has taken an unexpected turn. I nodded in agreement. Yes, I think that's wise. I spoke again in French, making my position crystal clear. Je protégerai mon fils. À vous de décider comment procéder. Mais sachez que je n'ai aucun problème à contacter les autorités si nécessaire. I will protect my son. It's up to you to decide how to proceed, but know that I have no problem contacting the authorities if necessary. Thomas still looked bewildered by the rapid turn of events. He turned to Camille one more time. I'm going to stay and talk with my mother. I think you should go with your parents now. Well, we'll talk tomorrow. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion on Camille's face, a flash of anger and frustration, quickly masked by resignation. Fine, she said coolly, dropping all pretense of tears. We will talk tomorrow. As they gathered their belongings in tense silence, I maintained my composure, standing tall beside my son. At the door, I offered a final parting in French, my voice gentle but firm. Au revoir, et bonne chance avec vos futurs projets qui, j'espère, n'impliqueront pas de fraude. Goodbye, and good luck with your future plans, which I hope will not involve fraud. Monsieur Dubois gave me a slight, respectful nod as they left, while Madame Dubois avoided my eyes altogether. Camille stormed out without another word or backward glance. As the door closed behind them, Thomas turned to me, his expression a mixture of confusion, hurt, and dawning realization. What just happened, Mom? I need you to tell me everything. I put my arm around his shoulders, feeling his slight trembling. Come sit down, sweetheart. This is going to be a difficult conversation, but I'm here for you. I've always been here for you. The hours after the Dubois family left were among the most painful I had ever shared with my son. We sat in the living room until nearly dawn, cups of tea growing cold beside us as I gently explained everything I had overheard. Thomas listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking a clarifying question, his face growing more drawn with each revelation. Did she really call you an ugly cow? He asked at one point, his voice hollow. I nodded, reaching for his hand. That's actually the least concerning part, sweetheart. People can think what they want about my appearance. It's the calculated deception that worries me. As the night progressed, Thomas moved through stages of disbelief, anger, and finally, a quiet, painful acceptance. "I wanted to be wrong, Mom," he whispered around 3 in the morning. "I really thought she loved me." "I know, honey," I said, my heart breaking for him. Sometimes the people who are most skilled at deception are also the most charming. It's not your fault you didn't see it. By the time dawn broke, Thomas had decided to confront Camille directly the next day. I suggested he meet her in a public place rather than alone, and he agreed. The trust between them irreparably shattered. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Camille's determination. She called Thomas early the next morning, sobbing hysterically, claiming I had threatened and insulted her family, twisted her words, and was trying to destroy their happiness out of jealousy and possessiveness. Thomas, still reeling from our conversation, was momentarily thrown by her performance. He called me immediately after speaking with her, his voice uncertain. "Mom, Camille says you misunderstood everything. That you were hostile to her family and made up these accusations because you don't want me to be happy." Though it hurt to hear him wavering, I understood. Camille had spent months gaining his trust and love. My revelations had come as a complete shock, and it was natural for him to grasp at any explanation that might allow him to preserve his original understanding of their relationship. "Thomas," I said gently, "let me ask you something. Have I ever lied to you? Have I ever tried to come between you and someone you cared about before?" "No," he admitted. "Never. And would it make any sense for me to suddenly start now? To make up elaborate stories about conversations in a language I supposedly don't understand?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, it wouldn't." Then I did something I hadn't planned. I revealed that I'd been so concerned about the evening that I'd discreetly recorded parts of the dinner conversation on my phone, a precautionary measure I'd taken when my suspicions were first aroused. I had captured several of Camille's damning statements in French, along with their context. "I don't want to play this for you unless it's absolutely necessary," I told him, "but it's here if you need definitive proof." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "I don't need to hear it. I believe you, Mom. I need to see her one more time, to hear what she has to say face to face." I respected his decision, though I worried about Camille's manipulative abilities. But I had raised a perceptive son, and now that his eyes were opened, he could see the truth for himself. Their meeting at a local cafe that afternoon lasted less than 30 minutes. Thomas later told me that he had asked Camille point-blank about her conversations in French and her intentions regarding their marriage. At first, she tried denial, then tears, then anger. When none of these tactics worked, she finally dropped the pretense entirely. "She actually laughed, Mom," Thomas told me that evening, his voice hollow with disbelief. "She said I was an idiot for not securing a prenup, and that plenty of marriages are arrangements anyway. She said at least she was honest enough to admit it now, and that her plan was perfectly legal." Was it the most painful moment of his life? Probably. But it was also the moment that saved him from years of deception and eventual financial and emotional devastation. Camille made one final attempt to salvage her plan, showing up at Thomas' apartment the next day with a dramatic apology and promises that Shed had a change of heart. She claimed she had initially pursued him for practical reasons but had genuinely fallen in love. Couldn't they start fresh with complete honesty? But Thomas wasn't fooled. Her performance fell flat now that he could see the calculation behind every tearful word and tender touch. He asked her to leave and not contact him again. The Dubois family left for France 3 days later, cutting their American trip short. I later learned through a mutual acquaintance that Monsieur Dubois had been genuinely appalled by his daughter's scheme once it was fully revealed, while Madame Dubois had been aware of at least some aspects of it, but had convinced herself it wasn't truly harmful. As for Thomas, the aftermath was predictably difficult. He canceled the honeymoon arrangements, losing his deposit but considering it a small price to pay compared to what might have happened. He threw himself into his work, avoiding social situations for several months. I gave him space but remained present, available whenever he wanted to talk or simply sit in companionable silence. Sometimes healing doesn't need words. One evening, about 6 months later, as we shared dinner at my house, Thomas looked up from his plate with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. "You know what, Mom? I think I'm finally grateful this happened," he said. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Grateful?" He nodded thoughtfully. "If I had married Camille, I might have spent years in a false relationship, maybe even had children, before discovering the truth. The pain would have been so much worse. Now I know what to look out for. I know the difference between love and performance." His wisdom brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, he reminded me so much of his father, the same thoughtful analysis, the same ability to find meaning in difficulty. Over the following year, Thomas slowly emerged from his shell. He joined a hiking club, reconnected with old friends, and eventually, almost without realizing it, began to open himself to the possibility of love again. That's how he met Natalie, a pediatric nurse with a warm laugh and kind eyes. Their relationship developed naturally and slowly, built on genuine shared interests and values rather than whirlwind romance. When he brought her to dinner at my home, I saw none of the calculation or performance I'd witnessed with Camille, just a woman who clearly adored my son for exactly who he was. As for me, I surprised myself by eventually finding forgiveness for Camille. Not because she deserved it, but because holding on to anger served no purpose. I sometimes wonder what became of her, whether she found another target or, perhaps, optimistically, learned something from the experience. The most unexpected outcome of this painful episode was the deepening of the bond between Thomas and me. Our relationship had always been close, but navigating this crisis together created a new level of trust and understanding. He came to value my perspective in a way he hadn't before, and I gained new respect for his resilience and emotional intelligence. If there is wisdom to be found in my story, perhaps it is this: love should never feel like a performance. True affection doesn't need elaborate staging or calculated gestures. It's revealed in the small moments, the casual kindnesses, the comfortable silences. And sometimes, protecting those we love means finding the courage to speak difficult truths, even when doing so is painful for everyone involved. I wonder, have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love? Has your intuition ever warned you about someone when everyone else seemed charmed? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to hear more of my life's lessons learned the hard way. Remember to like and share this video if you found it meaningful. Thank you for listening, and remember, trust your instincts. They rarely lead you astray.